afternoon. We're delighted to be joined by Sigrid Kaag, who you well know is our Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, who just briefed the Council. Sigrid, please go ahead and we'll take a few questions.
Thank you very much, Steph, and delighted to be here again in a new capacity. I've just provided my initial 20-day report to the Council as Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. Since my appointment, as you know, I've met a high number of officials, members of the Security Council, but of course also foreign ministers, spoken to international NGOs, and I think most importantly, I've met with Israeli officials, members of the War Cabinet, with Egyptian officials, foreign affairs, defense, other colleagues, and of course also Jordan, where temporarily I'm based. And obviously it's always with the goal to meet the objectives of the resolution, which is expedite, facilitate, and accelerate the humanitarian assistance to reach the civilian population in Gaza, and secondly, establish a UN mechanism that can actually help verify and monitor the humanitarian relief consignments for the civilian population. And I must say, I was very encouraged by the reiterated, clear voices of support from all council members in support of the mandate. I think very helpful questions were asked. What I've done in the briefing, I have laid out a number of initial observations. I mean, it is only 20 days, but initial observations and recommendations, and these actually are structured around 4 points. First of all, the supply routes to Gaza and access to Gaza. Secondly, the situation in Gaza and distribution across Gaza, what that would entail. And thirdly, some issues, of course, of critical importance for the enabling environment. And fourth, the establishment of the UN mechanism itself. And ultimately, and the Secretary General has said it last week too, this is not about counting trucks. This is about volume, quality, speed, and continuous delivery of humanitarian and commercial goods to reach the civilians of Gaza. And the mechanism, when up and running, can really help facilitate that. It helps us to track, it helps us to enhance the transparency, that we know what's coming in, whom it's for. It helps with the verification, and obviously to know if it really reached the civilian population. Those were the first 20 days. Once I leave here tomorrow, I'll be in Washington, then I travel onwards to Abu Dhabi, Cyprus, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and I hope definitely to be back in Gaza again before I return to Jordan. That was it for this moment.
Edie?
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaag. Very nice to see you here again. Can you give us some details on the 4 points that you raised? And can you also tell us what the implications for your job are of the suspension of aid to UNRWA by so many countries?
Yeah, I'll try to do it fairly briefly. First of all, when you're looking at the supply routes and access, there are opportunities obviously to do more via land from Jordan. The Israeli government and Jordanian government are in a very constructive discussion around that. If we're looking at additional supplies and the logistical review, the support to the Egyptian Red Crescent Society, the question is, can we do more? Can we do it differently? Under the leadership, of course, of the Egyptian authorities and the Egyptian Red Crescent Society. So I've detailed a few of the options, and of course also the importance of land routes and arrival of goods in Israel, and what the options are there. If you're looking at an increase in the number of crossings, how the use of the crossing Kerem Shalom, Abu Salem could be enhanced, given its importance currently for the humanitarian relief operations. I mean, there are a number of these types of examples. When you're looking at the distribution in Gaza, I very much laid out what, of course, is needed when it comes to deconfliction, when it comes to the operating environment, what humanitarian workers, not just the UN, would require to be able to reach all in Gaza, with particular regard for the population in northern Gaza. And then, of course, also the other discussions we need to have when it comes to, as I just mentioned, deconfliction, but also the types of supplies that are needed. So not only humanitarian, but also commercial, because before the 7th of October, There was a bulk of commercial goods that went into Gaza. Humanitarian assistance alone, as much as we beef it up, it won't meet the needs of the civilian population. A few examples.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I just want first to follow up on my colleague's question that you didn't answer, which is how the cut of UNRWA funds is affecting your work. And my question is about, again, about the mechanism you talked about. How is this different from what you have now, given the fact that, if I understood you correctly, it is still the case that Israel will have to review every aid that comes into Gaza, even through Rafah, which means that you will still have all these bureaucracies there. Are you looking into a new way of, in the way that the United Nations is the party that's responsible to looking into these aid, like, for example, cross-border in Syria, for example? Why not have something like that where you will have it more quickly? Thank you.
Well, I think we first need to acknowledge that every situation is different, but when it comes to UNRWA, it's not a question of how UNRWA would affect my work. It's how the a potential risk to the operational ability of UNRWA to meet the needs of the civilian population in Gaza, how that's affecting the lives of the people in Gaza. That's the only thing that's at stake here. Of course, the Secretary General is meeting this afternoon a number of member states. As you know, and I believe it was just said as well in earlier sessions also with Stefan, he's taken very swift action. And Commissioner General Lazzarini has taken equally swift action. There will be an investigation, and independently on the 17th of January, Philippe had already announced an independent review. I do not want to precipitate that. It's also not within my purview, but it's very critical that we recognize the central role that UNRWA plays in the Gaza Strip in the delivery of humanitarian aid, and prior, of course, to the conflicts, when schools were open or the clinics were open or other facilities run by the agency, all those were services in support of the civilian population. So I can't precipitate this. There's an ongoing discussion, I think, and donor countries, of course, have set their parameters and also have given clarity. It's an ongoing discussion. There's no substitution for the humanitarian role that is played in Gaza. We need to all ramp up, given the totality of needs and the scale and the complexity of the crisis, but there's no substitution. The mechanism, I would say we do it in phases, as I've said in the Council. Currently, there is no space, given the fact that there is no ceasefire and the conflict is raging. There's no space to have monitors all over Gaza to work with the agencies to see, to verify and monitor how and to whom aid is distributed. This is in support of mandates of agencies. What we'll start to do is to establish a database, which is very important, to know who's donating what, when it's coming. Prior clearance. It's based on the example that's been used through UNVIM in Yemen. Prior clearance can be given. And you also then have a totality of aid and supplies that is coming, which helps actually the humanitarian community and the INGOs to set better priorities and prioritize, because currently we're not in a position to do so. We're sometimes surprised by the very generous donations, and then you risk having delays that are not necessary. Equally so, there's an ask, for instance, that we will be very quickly based in Rafah, and then it depends on the consultations and negotiations and approval or agreement of the concerned member states on how the UN's role could be structured. But this is early days, and I do not want to sort of elaborate further because I want to leave space for the conversations to be had.
Talal?
Hello.
Hi, Talal.
Nice to see you. Resolution 2720 stipulates that your office should be in Gaza. Mm-hmm. You're not. You're in Amman. I'm sure you're keen to be in Gaza and between the people you're serving. Do you have an approximate time when this move from Amman to Gaza will happen? And secondly, do you plan to negotiate with the Israeli a permanent and accurate list of dual usage items? Because this is delaying the aid of coming into Gaza through Rafah and through, because items are sometimes considered dual usage, go back to the end of the of the line, and the next day they let it go in the same ballots, the same items. So there's no particular definition of what is the dual usage and what's not.
In answer to your first question, it is as soon as conditions permit. And that, of course, depends also on security assessments. But I certainly hope it will be sooner rather than later. It's my sincere intent to be based formally, as per the resolution, in Gaza and working from Gaza. Secondly, indeed, and I think that was a question I didn't answer yet to Ibtisam fully, we're also obviously discussing on behalf of the humanitarian community what would be the basic humanitarian commodities and goods that ought to be allowed into Gaza, and then you have a wide category within. Equally so, as I said, commercial goods need to be allowed back in. There'll be no recovery, let alone reconstruction in future, without that broad bandwidth. But these are not necessarily discussions we can resolve from one day to the next. But again, the mechanism and database provides also transparency. We all need to be talking about the same thing. And there is a divergence of views, I would say, as to what's allowed in or what would be reasons for rejections, if they're rejected, if it's for reasons of packing or lack of information. It can sometimes be quite benign, and obviously I want to try to remove as many possible obstacles or constraints as I can.
Sherwood, Bryce.
Ms. Kaag, thank you. Sherwin Briceby, South African Broadcasting. It sounds like the success of your mandate will depend on the actions of the belligerents on the ground. What are your key prerequisites of the parties involved in this conflict? And I wonder if in any measure the recent order handed down by the International Court of Justice would inform the success of your mandate. Maybe speak to that as well, please.
Yeah, well, perhaps maybe I can just sort of reiterate that this is not about me. This is the collective responsibility of the international community as expressed by the Security Council. And the mandate is ways to achieve what we need to do is acceleration, expedition, facilitation of optimal humanitarian assistance to the people in Gaza, the innocent civilians. That's what it is. And we can measure that indeed. Are we doing more? Are we getting access? Are we supplying in a safe and secure manner? In any situation of conflict, of course, the absence of a ceasefire, of a temporary ceasefire, a humanitarian ceasefire, has often been reiterated, is hampering, is causing delays, not only in the security and safety, but also, of course, if you look at the casualties, at the lack of maneuver to operate. So I'm not sure if it's about success, it's about ability to achieve and meet the needs. That's the only indicator, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a severe cold. Sorry. Well, as you've heard prior, the Secretary General has taken note of the preliminary measures, or the court ruling and the provisional measures, and it's to the parties to be informed, and I think that process takes place in The Hague.
Clarification on
Yeah.
the answer. Sorry, Michelle Nichols from Reuters. When you were answering the question on UNRWA, and you mentioned that there's no substitution for the humanitarian role. I just wanted to clarify that you were talking about there's no substitution for the humanitarian role played by UNRWA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Certainly under current circumstances.
As in, we're currently hearing a lot of countries say that while they're pausing funding for UNRWA, you know, they want the aid to get into Gaza. So just to sort of, I guess, ask the question in a different way, how, in all your discussions, how important is the role of UNRWA in the current aid operation in Gaza?
Well, I think there is, my 20 days also preceded the news and the decisions that had to be taken, and rightly so, concerning by the UN and Philippe Lazzarini concerning UNRWA. That's an ongoing process, but I think you've heard the Secretary General and other agencies, and they've been very clear. At the moment, beyond political decisions, which are GA bound, there is no way any organization can replace or substitute the tremendous capacity, the fabric of UNRWA, the ability, and their knowledge of the population in Gaza.
Thank you very much. Thank you.